Hello, and welcome back to Through the Trapdoor. I'm Katie.
And I'm Emily.
And this is our podcast where we read you Harry Potter fan fiction.
And have baby noises.
Yep, that's what we do now.
She's discovered her voice this week.
I've noticed.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty adorable.
It's also loud. She likes yelling loudly.
I mean, so do I, so I get it. Anything exciting going on?
No, nothing really exciting happening in my life. Just doing some house projects. Been working on redoing the front gardens.
Oh, that's fun.
Mm-hmm.
They did look very nice. Well, the one that I noticed. Yeah, all I do is work.
Mm-hmm.
And work out and hang out with you. So nothing's really happening in my life. I do think that the Saturday that this is posted, I will be camping.
That will be fun.
Yes, so I'm excited about that. I do thoroughly enjoy camping, and we're going to be on a pond that is fed by a lake, so different than what we normally do, which is river camping.
That will be fun.
Yes, I'm excited for the change.
Should we read?
I think we should read some fan fiction.
All right,
we're on chapter 13.
Chapter 13.
Whew! Holding on. Molly Havernot had never been to England, but from what she had heard, it would be a nice place to visit. London, she imagined, would be very much like New York City, large, sprawling, modern, and busy, with a more impressive historic district. Her parents had gone there once or twice when Molly was an infant to visit Molly's mother's sister, but they hadn't been since. The Havernots had other places to travel. Molly's parents were extremely well-to-do and sent Molly to an expensive all-girls school outside the city, where she lived for most of the year. Molly's parents lived in a very large, expensive apartment in Manhattan when they weren't jetting off on trips to places like Bermuda and Paris. When they were feeling domestic, they'd venture to one of their vacation homes, which they owned in Florida, Italy, and Hawaii. If you live in New York, Italy is not domestic.
Also, if you have a home in Italy, you're like
a hop, skip, and a jump away from London.
Yeah, like that flight time's like maybe 30 minutes.
It had been hard for Molly's parents to resist spoiling her as a child. They bought her a pony when she turned 9, a golden flute when she turned 10, several highly expensive and lengthy vacations between the years 11 and 16, a vacation and a new car when she turned 16. And this year, they had seen her so little, Molly was confident she could have talked them into buying her a space shuttle if she wanted them to. But she didn't want a space shuttle. She wanted a trip to London. Her parents' timing, however, was off. They were in London right now, and Molly was here, in New York, manning her mother's boutique. It wasn't really their fault this time. Her father had an important business conference, and her mother had marketing to do. And if she ever hoped to open another boutique outside of the United States, and Molly was getting double pay for this, otherwise she would have never let her parents jet off to Europe without her during the last few weeks of her summer vacation. Just pay a regular person and take your daughter to London.
Yeah, again, why do you not have an employees?
Oy. Okay, it must be the same cousin who wrote.
A couple paragraphs down, it does say she mailed her earlier.
Oh, alright, cool. She thought of her cousin Lily, who lived in England. They were the same age or thereabouts, and both went to expensive boarding schools. At least Molly thought Lily's school was expensive. She wasn't quite sure on that point. She wasn't quite sure how much Lily's parents could really afford. Not that they didn't have money, of course, but they didn't have international summer homes either. At any rate, Molly was glad she and her cousin had something in common. She had surprisingly little in common with the rest of her relatives. She'd mailed her earlier that year on a whim, and Lily had written back a rather nice letter, so Molly sent one back to her. From there, they began rather shaky correspondence. Lily was generally much more efficient in replying than Molly. Molly didn't know if it was a reflection on Lily's free time or Molly's own procrastination problems, and she wasn't sure she wanted to. However, she was quite sure she wanted to go to London. If she could make it to London, most likely she could make it to Lily's house. After all, it never hurt to have international friends. Molly checked her watch. Almost time for closing. It's about freaking time, she muttered under her breath, staring around at the empty store. The door didn't open, not one walk in or walk out, nothing moved. Molly heard herself breathing in the desolate silence. It was boring. Melody Caldwell's heart was beating fast. She clutched her bag in one hand and shoved her broomstick under her arm with the other. She stared at the innocent-looking shoe sitting on the chest of drawers. Will it work? She asked, hesitant to try. It had better, Eve Decker replied, looking just as hesitantly at the red, high-heeled wonder before her. I'm going to miss my portkey, Melody declared, still staring. If you don't hurry, Eve agreed flatly, and her gaze unwavering. Damn it, Melody said, with the feeling. Are you sure this'll work? Melody, this is part of my final year last year. Just trust me. Yes, but what did you get on your final? I did well enough. Just touch it, Melody. Oh, hell, Melody said, gritting her teeth. She extended one hesitant finger and lightly tapped the back of the shoe's heel. Immediately, she felt a tug at her navel, and then the whole world swirled away in a dizzy haze of color. Sunlight danced on the freckles, splashed across Lily Evans' nose, and shimmered across the red, curly locks splayed out atop a deep blue pillow, and then fell away behind the couch where it was warmed by the windowsill. A tired, early morning noise escaped from Lily's throat as she stirred and opened up her bleary eyes. She saw her mother's face. At first, she wondered why she was sleeping on the Potter's couch with her mother, especially when she saw Petunia curled up on the other end. Then she remembered that her mother was supposed to be dead, and just as quickly reminded herself that no, her mother was not dead, and in 5 seconds replayed all of last night in her mind. Her mother had escaped the Death Eaters. She hadn't been able to explain this right away, of course, as Lily had shrieked and then sobbed and then flung her arms around her mother so tightly that her mother could scarcely breathe, let alone talk. Lily and her mother and Petunia had just sat hugging and cried for so long that everyone else left them in their place. It didn't matter that Lily and Petunia despised one another. Their mother was more important to them than feuding. After the crying had subsided, however, Lily's mother explained everything. She was unable to sleep that night for one reason or another, and spent an hour unsuccessfully trying to find a good television program before deciding to do something more productive. With the fabulous logic that occurs to the erratic yet sleep-deprived in the late hours of the night, she decided she needed to expand her energy by cleaning the cellar.
Cool. Mm-hmm.
I mean,
listen, I've had the crazy late night, let's do weird things motivation too, so I get it.
Yeah. Same. Lily's house was very old-fashioned, and the cellar could only be reached by using an outside door. Lily's mother, armed with cleaning supplies, went outside and located these doors. With some difficulty, as they were completely grown over with ivy.
When was the last time you were in your cellar?
That your doors are completely grown over with ivy. She had to prop them open with a shovel so they wouldn't close and lock her in. There wasn't much in the cellar. Old dusty bookshelves holding dusty crumbling books, a few old gardening tools, and a shelf filled with several bottles of aging wine took up most of the space. The rest of the space was filled with boxes and boxes of sort of things you'd normally expect in an attic. Old clothes, forgotten pictures, useless antiques. Lily's mother cleaned for half an hour before the shovel gave way and the cellar doors closed with a distinctive bang. She began to shove uselessly against them, before giving up. Across the cellar was a small window, far too small to crawl through, but large enough to let in fresh air. Lily's mother hadn't wanted to choke on dust and die of suffocation before the night was over. After maneuvering around piles of sagging cardboard boxes, Lily's mother stumbled onto a small, forgotten couch, which she stood to open the window. "There's a couch down there, too?" She continued to clean, because why not?
Mm-hmm.
Until her eyes drooped and she curled up on the couch with a blanket that smelled faintly like mothballs. She'd been close to falling asleep when she heard the first ominous bang above her head. At first, she wasn't sure there had actually been a bang, because no other sounds followed. Then the screaming started. Oh, that's ominous.
Yeah, that's kind of terrifying. Trapped in your basement with screaming going on above you.
Ooh.
In a basement that you're trapped in, like with no access to the main house without going outside.
That's terrifying.
Yeah.
That is terrifying.
Yeah.
Also, why don't the doors open from the inside?
Yeah, like, are they bulkhead doors? Because there is a way to open them from the inside. Like, unless the handle broke off, in that case, why didn't you replace it? Not that they apparently use the basement very often.
Yeah. Miss Evans sat trapped in the cellar, frozen on a lumpy couch in a mixture of terror and horror, while above her, her entire family was murdered. Oh! By the time she had gotten up from the couch and stumbled across the cellar to bang against the doors, the screaming had stopped and there was only silence. She hurled herself against the wooden doors anyway, terrified and nauseated and furious until the boards cracked and she fell out into the night. First thing she saw was a gigantic skull sparkling in the sky. A snake slithered its way out of the skull's mouth like some sort of freakish tongue. She ran around the side of the house and saw a large group of men in dark cloaks and hellish masks standing in her front yard. She dove behind the bushes as one of them pointed down the street and began yelling. All the men ran in the direction the first man pointed, and Miss Evans ran over to her neighbor's hedges and peeked through the end to see what the masked men were running after. She caught a flash of distinctive red hair disappearing around the corner, and the men followed it. Miss Evans' knees gave way and she became violently ill on the grass before returning inside to telephone the police. When the police arrived, they found Miss Evans sobbing in an upstairs hallway. There were her two youngest children laying dead. After that came a blur of inspectors and police reports and unpleasant nights in hotels with police protection. It took a while for her to contact the Wizarding World. The police had been unwilling to let her travel to London, and even then she'd been rather unsuccessful in finding the entrance to the Leaky Cauldron. Luckily, the Ministry of Magic was looking for her. The minister himself had not known she was alive until the moment he saw her, but the wizarding detective who had been on her case had discovered her escape from the Death Eaters quickly. And then she had been brought to the Minister of Magic's household, where her remaining daughters were. They'd all cried themselves to sleep together on the couch, and Lily was the first to wake. She looked around and blinked in the early morning sunlight, and then closed her eyes and buried her face in the couch, unwilling to return to the world of the living just yet. Eve Decker stared at the empty space where Melody had been. She let out a breath she'd been all too aware she was holding and sat down on Melody's bed in relief. The portkey spell had been her charms final. She'd only gotten a 76% in charms this year. However, as Melody was probably still in one piece, there was no point worrying about the solidity of the spell. After all, it had worked. She took another deep breath, turned around, and left the room. What were her parents going to have to say about this? Lily woke again not much later in the morning and sat up slowly, easing herself off the couch, careful not to disturb her mother. Yawning, she walked into the kitchen, where she had discovered James having an early breakfast. He looked sleepy, but smiled when he saw her. "Morning, Lily." "Morning, James," Lily replied, smiling at the state of his hair. She walked over and smoothed down the especially messy part in the back. "What are you eating?" "Dunno," he replied, looking at his bowl, which was full of very colorful cereal. Some kind of fruity cereal thing. It's good. I could go for some strawberries right now. A bowl of strawberries magically appeared in the place next to James, along with a bowl of whipped cream and a small sugar dish. The house elves like you, James commented. They're never that efficient when I want something. They probably have to make it all from scratch. You eat so much, I'm surprised there's anything left in the kitchen, Lily teased, taking a seat. James kicked her ankle under the table, and she kicked him back. Taking the strawberries from the bowl and dipping it in the whipped cream, James tried to kick her again, but stubbed his toe against the chair leg instead. Ow! He cried, spitting out some of his cereal. Lily snorted at her strawberry and began giggling hysterically. It's not funny, James insisted, examining his foot. That was my favorite toe.
What? James, you sound like serious now.
I mean, they do spend a lot of time together.
True.
Lily gave him a strange look and took a bite of her strawberry. This would go good with a bowl of oatmeal. A bowl of oatmeal appeared right next to her bowl of strawberries. And brown sugar? She ventured, to the same pleasing results. Some tea wouldn't hurt either, she commented, and a cup appeared before her. Oh, I like these house elves, she said, grinning. James, who sat still moping over his foot again, glared at her. That's great, Lily, he said, sarcastically. I'm in severe emotional and physical pain, and all you can think about is the house elves. Lily rolled her eyes. James, quit being such a baby. I am not being a baby. I'm just concerned that this toe will now be deformed forever. I'm sure your toe's going to be fine. Sirius Black walked into the kitchen just as James said, Come on, Lily, just this once. I need you, I'll pay you. Sirius blinked and stared for a moment, and then turned around and left the way he had came. Lily and James stared at the door for a moment, then at each other. Then Lily burst into hysterical laughter, and James got up to run after Sirius. Lily was still laughing when the boys returned. Did someone slip special pills into your breakfast this morning, Lily? Sirius asked, sitting down at the place across from James. Lily nodded gleefully, and James, whispering, replied, It's the tea. Back off, this is my drugged tea. Sirius banged on the table in annoyance. The kitchen door swung open. Banging? Who's banging? What did I miss? Said the person at the door. Lily, James, and Sirius looked up to see a tall, shapely blonde girl wearing rather revealing dress robes standing in the kitchen door. Melody! Lily shrieked, jumping up so fast her chair fell on the floor. She scrambled past James and caught her best friend in a hug. Melody hugged her back tightly. How did you get here? Lily demanded. Porky, Melody replied, breaking the hug. But that's not important. Lily, your parents. Let's not talk about that, Lily said hurriedly, hugging her once again. It only then occurred to her that the scene with James and Sirius at breakfast this morning was the most normal one she'd had since, well, I'm glad you're here. I didn't have a chance to owl you, and I know. I had to read about it in the Daily Prophet, and, oh, Melody, there's so much to tell you. I mean, I just found out my mother's alive, and then my uncle wouldn't let me leave, and wait, what? Your mother? Your mother? Lily nodded, eyes shining with happiness and tears. Oh, Melody, we have to go somewhere and talk. It's been so terrible, and Come on. She took Melody by the hand and dragged her out of the kitchen. James and Sirius watched as Lily and Melody disappeared in a whirl of clatter. They'd looked at each other across the table. James opened his mouth to speak and then decided against it. Shaking his head, Sirius stared for a moment longer and then felt words bubbling in his throat. Just as he'd opened his mouth, the words died away. And then he closed it again. He stared at Lily's strawberries and opened his mouth again, but lost the words. He looked at James and then back at the strawberries. Sirius considered James's bowl of cereal. It was very colorful and vaguely reminded him of the magical suckers Melody used to eat every week. He glanced back at Lily's strawberries and then opened his mouth, hesitant for a moment, and then, "Do you think she's going to eat those?" Lily stretched out in the sand and enjoyed the sensation of it sliding between her toes. Melody, who was stretched out behind her, had begun telling her of Paolo. The girls had retired to a corner of the indoor gardens, and Lily had just spent over an hour telling Melody everything that had happened so far that summer, with Ethan and James and Petunia and her mother and the priest and everything. So far, it didn't sound nearly as fun-filled as Melody's summer, with shopping and parties in her uncle's fabulous house. No, Lily, you did not have a fun summer.
No, you worked, and then
90% of your family is dead. Of course, the most exciting part was Paolo. He sounded amazing and wonderful and sexy and was kind of boy Lily dreamed about, but very seldom got to meet. Ethan was kind of like that, only in a very English way. Paolo was amazing and wonderful and sexy in that Italian way. Not that Lily had ever seen Paolo, of course, but the way Melody was describing him, she couldn't imagine him as anything other than sexy.
I'm kind of upset that we haven't had any follow-up with Ethan yet and his, wizarding status, because I still am leaning towards he's a wizard.
So no more Sirius? Lily asked, intensely curious. Melody's eyes clouded over. "Let's not talk about Sirius," she said. "Sirius is too confusing." Lily sighed and tilted her head back towards the fake blue sky. "Like James," she agreed. "No, not like James," Melody insisted, shaking her head. "He's not like James at all. At least with James, you know where you stand." Lily looked over at Melody, puzzled. "Sirius is crazy about you, don't you know that?" "Even if he is, it's not like he ever shows it. I mean, sure, we kissed at New Year's, but after that, nothing. Nothing! Not even a, 'I'll miss you, Melody,' or 'I'll owl you, Melody,' or 'Don't forget about me, Melody.' Nothing. What am I supposed to think?" Lily frowned. "Well, what did you tell him?" "That I was leaving." "What, not a 'I'll miss you' Sirius, or an 'I'll owl you' Sirius, or—" "Oh, shut up!" Melody snapped, looking extremely annoyed, and Lily smiled. "No more complaining then until you at least try." "Try? Lily, I've been trying for several years." Lily raised an extremely skeptical eyebrow. "Oh, really? And what have you done exactly? Changing your hair color? Throwing snowballs at him? Run off to Switzerland and Brazil and America for every vacation since the end of 5th year? Yeah, that's hot, Melody." But you know what, Lily smirked in the most annoying fashion. "You can't just admit when I'm right." "Yes, well, you can't admit that you're in love with James." Lily shrieked. "I am not in love with James."
Okay.
"Like hell you're not. Merlin's britches. Lily, every time the boy gets within 10 feet of you, you get this goofy, happy look on your face. Like you've just, I don't know, won the lottery or something." "I do not," Lily cried, sitting up. We're just like, I just like him a little, that's all." Melody let out a bark of laughter. "You are so far into denial, you might as well be drowning, Lily. You are in love with James Potter." "I am not in love with anyone." "Yes, you are, and you're a horrible liar. Admit it." "I'm too young to be in love." "Like hell you are." "Well, if I'm in love with James, then you're in love with Sirius." "But I don't know that anymore, Lily. You can't say that." Lily blinked and froze. "Wait, what?" "I said I don't know if I'm in love with Sirius anymore," Melody repeated softly. So you're saying you were in love with Sirius?" "Well, what else can you call it?" Melody demanded. I don't know, a crush, an infatuation, a very strong form of like?" Melody shook her head. "Lily, what is it that has you so terrified to use the word love? God, I mean, I'm not talking about I'd lay down and die for you, let's grow old together, happily ever after love. It's just love. I love my mother, I love you, I love James, I love Sirius. Yes, just in different ways. But that's not in love. Being in love is all those things you just said, isn't it? Melody shook her head and stared at the ground. I don't know, Lily. I guess so. Maybe I don't know what I feel about Sirius, but it sure was something. And you don't feel that anymore? I don't know, Lily, she replied softly. It's just things with Paolo and it's just confusing things, you know? Mrs. Potter contemplated her bagel as her husband contemplated his eggs. Miss Evans walked into the dining room, still looking sleepy, trailed by her daughter Petunia. Petunia was very quiet. Mrs. Potter had noticed she hadn't spoken to anyone except her mother since she'd arrived at the cottage. Mrs. Potter got the distinct feeling that Petunia wasn't very fond of wizards, her sister in particular. Good morning, she greeted pleasantly. Have a seat anywhere you'd like. If you want something, just say so, and the house elves will take care of it for you. Thank you, Miss Evans replied, and Petunia remained mute. I'll just have tea, please, Miss Evans announced, uncomfortably to the silence, and shortly the requested item appeared before her. Petunia mumbled something Mrs. Potter couldn't quite decipher, but another cup of tea appeared before her, along with a plate of toast and marmalade. At the other end of the table, Christopher wiped his mouth with his napkin and rose. I'm off to work, dear, he said, walking over to lay a perfunctory kiss on her forehead. All right, Mrs. Potter replied. Have a good day. Christopher grunted in a manner that suggested he very much doubted this was going to happen, and Mrs. Potter sighed and ignored him. Not that she couldn't blame him, of course, but still, he didn't have to make those kinds of noises in her presence. Across the table, Miss Evans sipped her tea and met Mrs. Potter's eyes with a weak smile. I can't thank you enough for what you've done for my girls, she began, and Mrs. Potter shook her head. It's what any mother would do for another. I'm just glad I could help in such a time of need, and your girls are all welcome here as long as you need. Mrs. Evans' face sagged in relief. Thank you, she repeated. Thank you so much. It's nothing at all. If you need anything, just let me know. Miss Evans nodded and took a cleansing drink of her tea. Mrs. Potter felt a deep swell of sorrow for her to lose so much, and all at once. It was not something Mrs. Potter ever wanted to experience. It was the kind of thing that took the joy from your smile and the sunlight from your day. It made you wonder why the world was still spinning. Made you wonder, after so much bad had happened, if you could ever be happy again. Melody had gone in search of a more appropriate garment. Lily had gone in search of inner peace. It was a toss-up as to who was getting farther.
Hopefully Melody.
I would assume Melody. Of course, Lily really wasn't in search of inner peace, but it was a nice thing to say when people decided to interrupt you when you wanted to be alone. It made you sound very mystical and spiritual and, well, in Lily's case, full of crap. But it wasn't the point. Really, she was in search of her feelings for James, and not that they were hiding or anything. When she thought of James, they pretty much jumped right to the surface. But after that whole conversation with Melody, she was very confused on how deep her affections for James were starting to run. Thinking? Asked a voice. Lily craned her neck backwards to see James. Or something, she replied, returning her gaze to the water. Mind if I sit? Lily shook her head, and James sat down beside her, kicking off his shoes and plunging his feet into the water as well. Lily's pulse fluttered. Damn it, she thought. That's not fair. How am I supposed to tell if I'm really in love with him or not if my hormones decide to take over? I'm glad you came back, James said after a minute or so. Did you think I wouldn't? Lily asked, gazing up at him. I was afraid you might not want to. Why? I don't know. Maybe because you didn't say goodbye, James admitted, turning his gaze to her. He tore his gaze from hers, and her heart dropped. What the floppin' hell? He shifted, and her heart jumped. I'm going psychotic, she decided. He spoke, and the fibers of his voice made goosebumps rise up and down her arms. Damn it! I'm turning into a cheap romance novel. What are you thinking about? James wondered, looking at her again. Lily's heart soared. Fucking hormones, she thought darkly. Inner peace, she replied, feeling lame and untruthful, and James's lopsided grin played hopscotch with her innards. Are you Buddhist now or something? Or something, Lily mumbled, staring at the sand, warring with her psychotic emotions. Lily? James asked, reaching over and tipping her chin with his finger. Are you all right? The contact of James's finger on her face made her skin tingle, and her stomach leap with joy like it was a bloody Christmas morning. Oh, damn it, James! Lily cried, and James looked at her very confused. She brought her hand up and pulled down his face to meet her. There was very little resistance on James's part, and in the next few seconds, not only was he kissing her, but he pulled her so close that she was almost in his lap, wrapped one arm around her waist and one hand positioned in her hair on the right side of her face. Lily's entire body exploded in happiness and tingles and stomach acrobatics and heart flutters and a wave of heat. Everything about James was so warm, his arm around her waist, his side pressed against hers, his thumb against her cheek, his lips against hers, and even occasionally his tongue mingling with hers. Everything about him felt so good, Lily didn't want to let go. I don't care if my emotions are all crazy. She liked this, and she decided to pull James closer. James decided that this was an opportune moment to pull Lily into his lap, and their lips tore apart for a moment as Lily settled herself. Sorry to interrupt, Melody said, indeed sounding very sorry, but your mothers are looking for you? Lily pouted and rested her head on James' shoulder. Do we have to go now? Well, they're waiting for you? Tell them we'll be there in a minute, James said, glancing at Melody, who rolled her eyes and left. He then fixed his gaze on Lily, kissed her again, and then several more times quickly, just for emphasis. We should go, he announced, sliding her off his lap and standing, turning to help her to her feet. What do you want, they think? Lily wondered as James laced his hand in hers and let her out of the garden. I don't know, James said, shrugging. Melody was waiting for them at the entrance of the garden. Finished now, are we? She asked, shooting Lily a suggestive glance that made Lily's cheeks burn. James simply looked annoyed. Aren't you supposed to be telling them we'll be there in a minute? Yes, I am also supposed to make sure you two don't get lost on your way there, she replied, shooting another glance at Lily, whose cheeks burned brighter, and she inched towards James, attempting to hide her face behind his shoulder. They walked in silence until they reached the living room where Miss Evans and Miss Potter, Sirius, and surprisingly Petunia were waiting for them. On one side of the room sat Lily's Hogwarts trunk. My trunk! She cried. How did you get it? Sit down and we'll tell you, Miss Evans said, and Lily plopped down on the couch next to Sirius, where James quickly joined her. Melody sat on the other side of James. This family meeting is now called to order, Miss Potter announced, which caused all the teenagers present to raise their heads and stare at her nonplussed. First order of business. Melody, I suggest you contact your parents and tell them you've arrived safely in England and that you plan on staying with us for the remainder of the holidays, unless, of course, you plan on returning home before the beginning of the school term. Melody shook her head. Very well, then. You may borrow one of our owls after this meeting is adjourned, and you may take any bedroom you wish for the remainder of your stay. Now, Sirius, Miss Potter continued, do you plan on staying for the remainder of holidays? It's a distinct possibility, Sirius replied. I might travel to King's Cross with my family, but I'm still going to have to tell the house elves to overstock the kitchens. Sirius grinned, unless you all want to go hungry. Mrs. Potter then turned to Miss Evans, who nodded and stood. In light of recent events, we've put our house up for sale, she announced. Petunia looked horrified, and Lily, having already known this, simply nodded, looking truly somber again for the first time all morning. Mrs. Potter has graciously opened her home and hospitality to us, and I've decided to take her up on the offer, at least until you girls are both settled in school, and then we'll see. Petunia looked as though she was about to vomit, though she didn't say anything. She'd taken to not speaking when there were other wizards in attendance. She made a strangled sort of noise, and Miss Evans shot her a pleading glance. I know it's not the best arrangement, Petunia, but please, it's only for a little while. Petunia shook her head at her mother in disbelief. We're going to be staying in adjacent bedrooms, so as soon as this meeting is over, Lily, you can take your trunk up. Did you catch that, James? Melody asked. As soon as we're done with this meeting, you can carry Lily's trunk upstairs. Both Lily and James attempted to step on Melody's feet at once and instead stepped on each other's, which instead of evoking proper admonishment from Melody, only made her laugh. I think the house elves can take care of the trunk, Miss Potter suggested, looking over at the teenagers, feeling rather alarmed, as they were all now stepping on each other's feet in reckless abandon, completely ignoring the fact that it was supposed to be a serious family meeting. Oh, right, the house elves, Miss Evans said. Well, I think that's all. Mrs. Potter nodded in agreement. This meeting is adjourned, she announced, and the first person up was Petunia. Everyone stared as Petunia furiously stalked across the room in the direction of the back door, which they could hear slamming even after she disappeared from sight. I better go talk to her, Mrs. Evans decided, hurrying after her daughter. Oh, Miss Potter said softly as she gone. I forgot, Lily. Well, all of you, I suppose. Really. The funeral is tomorrow.
Great, but nobody explained why Lily's trunk was there.
And why...
That
was a major topic of this family meeting. I would assume that the funeral is tomorrow. Why would the meeting be adjourned and then the funeral announced?
That was a weird family meeting.
Only 2 points were brought up.
Melody, I will your parents, and we're staying here. The house is for sale.
Oh, and serious, do I need to tell the house elves to get more food?
Yes.
So 3 points.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess that's it for this week.
All right. We'll see you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for joining us on our journey through the trapdoor.
You can leave us a review on Facebook or Apple Podcasts. It would literally mean the world to us.
Or you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at TheTrapdoor16.
Or if you have any longer thoughts, you can shoot us an email at throughthetrapdoor16@gmail.com.
Thank you so much, and we'll see you again next week.
See you next week.